Hi, I'm Sorry Saris, and welcome to my first official art video! Okay, that's too much. To get in the swing of making videos, I thought I'd start out with a pretty self-indulgent idea and make some Fakeamon based on the game Inscryption. Before we get into it, here are some disclaimers. First, there will be mild spoilers for Inscryption, specifically Acts 1 and 2. I won't be talking about the plot too much, but if you were looking to avoid that, then this might not be the video for you. Or you could play the game and then come back. There might be some flashing images in the time-lapse sections. I tried to edit out most of it, but please be careful if you have issues with watching flashing lights or images. Okay, onto the designing. We'll be starting with PO3. These designs are going to show up in the same order I drew them, and since PO3 was the first one, I feel like they ended up being straightforward. I had decided ahead of time that I wanted to use the animals on the talking cards in the designs, so I started out looking at other mustelid or stoat-related Pokemon to get a sense of how to stylize them. The first two sketches were pretty rough, but they helped me settle on a good mix of machine and stoat features in the third sketch. Then I did a more refined sketch on top of that looser one to help me decide on colors and for line art later on. I like the finished design, but I do wish I had found a way to incorporate the cranks on PO3's head and body. I did try it in the initial sketches, but it always looked kind of weird, and it didn't really fit with the more streamlined design I ended up with. Oh well. For color, I basically just color picked from their Act 2 sprite and their model. The entire time I was doing these designs, I kept going back and forth on whether to use the sprite palettes or the model palettes for the default colors. On one hand, it makes sense for the sprites in the prototype game to be their default, but on the other hand, I tended to like the model-based ones more. In the end, I went with the sprite palettes being the default and the model palettes being the shinies. Anyway, back to PO3. I feel like most of this design is pretty self-explanatory, but to break up the longer stoat body, I added those glowing sections. Those were also intended as a reference to the energy mechanic. Then I just added shading and lighting, which took me a bit to figure out because of all the glowing parts. Okay, let's see the finished design. This is Stoatle, the machine Pokemon. It is electric and steel. Stoatle is adept at operating many machines. It is attracted to industrial areas where it presses other Pokemon into its service. So I had a hard time coming up with something for Grimora. I really love how Pokemon stylizes bugs, but it was difficult trying to combine that with Grimora's original concept. The elements I settled on including were the shape of her hair and the skull on her head. So for the final loose sketch, I ended up with this plainer, more stink bug-like body. As I was doing the final sketch, I found pictures of these leaf-footed bugs called Thasus gigas. They're not closely related to the brown marmorated stink bug, but they're apparently sometimes called stink bugs, because they have a similar chemical defense. I really like the round segments on their antenna, so I gave my Grimora Pokemon some vertebrae-shaped ones. I found out later that the nymph forms of these bugs have this weird pattern on their back that looks like a ribcage, which is a funny coincidence. I did end up adding a ribcage to my design, since I noticed that the stink bug has all those segments on the underside of its body, and I thought it would be a good way to add more bones. Another thing I really wanted to do with Grimora was have a reference to her quill somewhere. I settled on adding the shape to her lower legs. The last notable change I made from the original sketch was to get rid of her third pair of legs. They weren't really working for me, and I think the shape of her body without them actually gives more of a ghostly vibe. It kind of makes her look like a sarcophagus. Here's the finished artwork. This is Halimora, the crypt Pokemon. Halimora is a combination of Halimorpha, the genus of the brown marmorated stink bug, and Grimora. It is ghost and poison type. Legend has it that by recording the details of a being's passing, Halimora can bring it back to do its bidding. It enjoys battling, but will release the deadly toxin stored in its chest when badly injured. Magnificus was also difficult to work with at first, but when I got to a more solid idea, the drawing process came surprisingly easy. I know Magnificus is probably a tree or a plant guy, but I didn't want to make him super plant-like because that's reserved for Leshy in my mind, so I leaned more into the wolf appearance. Then after accidentally making Sham Deltarune, I got a stroke of inspiration. Originally, I just wanted to have his eye be a gem as a reference to Mox, but I also wanted a way to connect his design to painting. And you know what people used to make paints and dyes out of? Minerals, oxides, and stones. Even though none of the actual Mox gems were used to make pigment, I think it's close enough. So with that justification, I added more gems to his coat and got to coloring. I think his default palette turned out really yummy looking. He kinda looks like Sour Patch Kids. I'd never rendered gems in the Pokemon style before, so I looked at Diancie a lot for reference. Okay, let's see the finished artwork. Lupin the Sorcery Pokemon. Psychic and Rock. Lupin is from lupine and pan, as in pan for gems. I don't really love this name since it reminds me of a different property, but this was the best I could come up with, so if you have something better, let me know. Lupin collects precious gems to crush into pigment for its paints. It is known for its great artistic ability and can become enraged if its vision is not followed. I actually felt like I did way more sketching for Leshy, because at this point I was getting kind of impatient to be done. I think this caused me to hit a wall with the design, so after a break I came back and thought more about what I wanted out of it. Since Leshy is based off a spirit in Slavic mythology, I did more research and decided on this more tree-like head. Originally I was going to make him more deer-like to match the animal inspiration of the other scribes, but this definitely fits his original concept better. I also added mushrooms and his weird little goat legs. I think my favorite detail of this design are the markings on his horns. Those were inspired by the eye-like marks on the bark of aspen trees. First I was sad that I wouldn't be able to incorporate Leshy's camera somewhere, but then I was like, what if he has photographic memory? This felt like a bit of a cop-out, so I also made him do that framing pose to sell it more. He looks kind of goofy, but I think if you were stuck in the dark with him, it would still be pretty scary. Now for the last artwork. Leshy, the wilderness Pokemon. It is fairy and grass. Leshy lives deep in forested areas and will often seek out travelers to participate in its elaborate games. It is said that Leshy will always remember the face of any person it meets. That's all the scribes done. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have another series you'd like to see me turn into Fakemon, you can let me know in the comments. This was a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to making more Fakemon and other art videos. See you next time!